So my name's Dr. Dannielle Green, and I'm a researcher at Anglia Ruskin University and the director of the Applied Ecology Research Group. And for the last 10 years, I've been researching the impacts of plastic pollution. This is everything from big pieces of plastic all the way down to microplastics, which are pieces of plastic that are less than 1 millimetre in size. So microplastics are small pieces of plastic. They can either be primary microplastics, which means that they're made to be small for a purpose. For example, microbeads, which are used as an exfoliant. Abrasive cleaners are also a type of primary microplastic. Or they can be secondary microplastics, which means that they're formed from the breakdown of larger plastic items. And these are the sorts of microplastics that are actually much more common. So, for example, if you have a plastic bag and then that breaks down into little tiny pieces of plastic film, those are a type of secondary microplastic. So the impacts of larger pieces of plastic are more obvious. If you imagine a big fishing net that has become lost and it continues to do something we call ghost fishing, that's quite an obvious impact. Large pieces of plastic can, of course, entangle organisms and quite often can cause death. With microplastics, it's difficult because they don't often cause death, they don't often kill organisms, but they lead to what's known as sublethal impacts, which means that you might have a reduction in reproductive rates. You might not be able to feed at the same rate or function in the same way. And these sorts of impacts are actually really ecologically important, because if you're not reproducing at the same rate, the population size isn't going to be as big. So that's a really important impact, but these are more difficult to prove. So a lot of microplastics research is laboratory-based experiments, because it has to be this way. It's not easy to do field experiments on microplastics. But we are finding a lot of evidence that microplastics can lead to quite significant and important effects on organisms. And this is everything from plants, microbes, invertebrates, and vertebrates as well. So microplastics, although they're not as easy to see as larger pieces, they are actually the most abundant form of solid waste on Earth. And of course, in this way, they're affecting every habitat and potentially every organism. It's more difficult to find somewhere where there aren't microplastics in this day and age. So our research is looking at the impacts of microplastics in aquatic environments and also on land, also human health as well. Some of our terrestrial or on-land research is looking at the impacts of microplastics on plant growth and on invertebrate communities in the soil. And at the moment, we're collaborating with the Botanic Gardens in Cambridge to look at these impacts in a more realistic setting, in a kind of semi-field experiment, if you will. And this is much rarer because most experiments are done in pots in the lab, which of course isn't as realistic than if you're doing it in an outside setting. So one of our PhD researchers, Amy Wright, is looking at how microplastics and mesoplastics, so that's slightly larger plastics, which have been very understudied in the literature, how they affect plant growth, and whether these effects are caused by the plastic particles themselves or the leachate, some of the chemical leachate that's coming from those plastics. So she's done a number of pot experiments and pilot studies to work up to this, and now she's doing an experiment in the Botanic Gardens to look at these impacts in a more realistic setting. So looking at the plant growth and also looking at invertebrate communities.
So here in this experiment, I've added normal conventional plastics, I've added biodegradable plastics and compostable plastics, alongside controls which have no plastics added to them. So I'm really trying to basically see how the biodegradable and compostable plastics compare to conventional ones, testing soil parameters, plant parameters. I've been growing spring barley in this experiment, so I'm seeing if it'll affect the yield and productivity of the crop.
So one of the main concerns with plastic pollution is single-use plastics. A lot of this is for packaging. About 40% of global production annually is for packaging uses, and most of that is single-use. But one piece of plastic pollution that often goes kind of underappreciated are cigarette butts. Now, the cigarette filter is made out of a type of plastic. A lot of people think it's paper, but actually it's plastic. It's a plastic called cellulose acetate. And each filter is made up of thousands and thousands of different microfibers, which are a type of microplastic. And when these get into the environment, the microplastics can be shed and persist in the environment. And of course, this is not just a piece of plastic pollution. We've also got all those chemicals that are retained in the filter, and these can leach out into the environment as well. So the research that we've done has found that cigarette butts can have impacts upon plants and animals in terrestrial, freshwater and marine habitats, and we have tested all three of those. We've found decreases in plant growth. We've found mussels, like marine mussels, their filtration rates are reduced, and that's important because these are ecosystem engineers that keep the water clean. They play a really important role. So if their filtration rates are reduced, that's quite a problem. And other issues in terms of mortality, reduced reproduction rates. Got a PhD student, Brigitte Ola-Kovacs, and she's found that freshwater snails, that their reproduction rates are decreased with cigarette butts. And obviously these are also at the base of the food web, so really important impacts.